Madison Martinez stood anxiously at the baggage claim area of Denver International Airport, her worn-out sneakers shifting nervously against the polished floor. The exhaustion from her 2-hour flight from Portland was evident in her dark-circled eyes, but a glimmer of hope remained in them. After 6 months of separation from her 7-year-old son Tommy, she was finally heading back to her hometown of Boulder to bring him home. The past months had been the hardest of her 28 years. Leaving Tommy with her parents had felt like ripping out a piece of her heart, but with only $30 in her pocket and an eviction notice on her door, she'd had no choice. Her friend Rachel had offered her a couch to sleep on in Portland and the promise of a waitressing job at her uncle's diner. The loan for the plane ticket had been another blessing from Rachel, who believed in Madison more than she believed in herself. The baggage carousel creaked to life, and Madison's heart began to race. Her second-hand duffel bag contained everything she owned: 3 sets of uniforms, some casual clothes, and most importantly, the envelope with 6 months' worth of savings. Every tip, every extra shift, every penny had gone into that envelope, $2,345, enough to get a small apartment and start fresh with Tommy. She watched as identical bags circled past her, their wheels clicking against the metal carousel. Her duffel bag was navy blue, with a frayed red strap she'd sewn on herself to make it more recognizable. The memory of Tommy helping her pick out the bright red fabric at the dollar store brought tears to her eyes. Their weekly video calls weren't enough. She needed to hug him, to smell his hair, to hear his laughter in person again. A flash of navy blue caught her attention. There it was, the red strap unmistakable against the worn fabric. Madison stepped forward, her fingers almost brushing the handle when a deep voice beside her whispered, "Don't touch that bag. It's not yours." She turned to face the owner of the voice, ready to argue, but her words caught in her throat. The man standing next to her was tall and well-dressed, his expensive suit a stark contrast to her faded jeans and oversized sweater. His dark eyes held a mixture of concern and authority that made her hesitate. "But it's exactly like mine," Madison protested, pointing at the red strap. "I sewed that on myself." The man shook his head, his expression serious. "Look closer at the handle." Madison leaned in, squinting at the leather handle, and noticed something she hadn't seen before, a tiny silver tag with initials that definitely weren't hers. Her stomach dropped as she realized her mistake. "I'm Michael Harrison, airport security," the man said quietly, showing her a badge. "We've been tracking a group using modified bags to smuggle drugs. Your bag is probably still coming, but I need you to be certain before you claim it." Madison's hands began to shake. The thought of accidentally taking the wrong bag and being arrested made her feel sick. Everything she had worked for these past 6 months, her chance to reunite with Tommy, could have been destroyed in an instant. More bags appeared on the carousel, and Michael stayed close beside her, his presence both reassuring and nerve-wracking. He smelled like expensive cologne, and Madison became acutely aware of the coffee stain on her sleeve from her rushed morning shift before the flight. "There," she said suddenly, spotting another navy blue bag with a red strap, but this time she could see the small tear near the zip where Tommy had once caught it on their apartment door. "That's definitely mine." Michael stepped forward with her, his hand hovering near the small of her back. "Wait," he commanded softly. Just as she was about to reach for the bag, he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of a man on the other side of the carousel, someone who had been watching them intently, but quickly turned away. "Got him," Michael murmured, typing rapidly on his phone. Within seconds, 2 plainclothes officers appeared and discreetly followed the man as he hurried toward the exit. "Now you can take your bag," Michael said, helping Madison lift the duffel from the carousel. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected tingle up her arm. "Would you mind coming with me for a few minutes? We'd like to ask you some questions about your bag. It seems these smugglers are copying legitimate passengers' luggage." Madison glanced at her watch, her heart racing. Her bus to Boulder would leave in 40 minutes, and she couldn't miss it. Her parents were expecting her. And Tommy was waiting. "I have to catch a bus," she explained, her voice trembling. "My son, I haven't seen him in 6 months. Please, I can't miss this bus." Michael's expression softened as he studied her face. Something in her eyes must have touched him, because he nodded slowly. "I'll drive you to Boulder myself after we're done. It's the least I can do for your help today, even if it was unintentional." Madison hesitated, clutching her bag closer. She'd learned the hard way not to trust easily, but there was something about Michael's gentle authority and kind eyes that made her want to believe him. Plus, he was an officer, she'd seen his badge. "How do I know you're really going to take me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out his card, handing it to her. "Call anyone you need to check my credentials. I understand your caution. It's smart. But I promise you, Madison, you'll be with your son today. In fact, you'll probably get there faster with me than on the bus." She stared at the card in her hand, running her thumb over the embossed letters of his name and title. Behind them, the carousel continued its endless rotation, but the choice before her felt like it might change everything. In a small interview room at the airport security office, Madison sat across from Michael, her duffel bag safely beside her chair. The room was warmer than the baggage claim area, but she couldn't stop shivering. She'd called her parents to explain the delay, trying to keep her voice steady as her mother expressed concern about her missing the bus. Tommy had been in the background, asking excitedly if he could talk to her, but she'd had to promise to call back soon. "I know you're anxious to get to Boulder," Michael said, his tone gentle as he slid a cup of coffee across the table to her. "We'll make this as quick as possible." He'd removed his suit jacket, and his crisp white shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms and a simple silver watch. Despite her nervousness, Madison couldn't help noticing how his dark hair curled slightly at his temples. "Can you tell me about when and where you bought your bag?" he asked, opening a notebook. Madison wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, grateful for something to hold on to. "It was at a second-hand store in Portland, about 5 months ago. The red strap wasn't on it, then I added that myself a few weeks later." She paused, remembering how she'd had to choose between buying new shoes for work or the bag. The bag had won because her old backpack had finally fallen apart. Michael nodded, making notes. "And you've noticed any similar bags during your travels?" "No, this is actually my first time flying," Madison admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I usually take the bus, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to explain how Rachel had insisted on buying her a plane ticket after finding her crying in the break room. Missing Tommy so badly, it physically hurt. But sometimes circumstances change. Michael finished for her, his dark eyes understanding. There was something in his expression that made Madison think he knew what it was like to make difficult choices. Just then, another officer entered the room with a tablet. "Sir, we've got the preliminary scan results from the other bag. You're going to want to see this." Michael studied the screen, his jaw tightening. "Cocaine, just as we suspected. But there's something else." He looked up at Madison, his expression grave. "The construction of that bag was identical to yours, down to the stitching pattern of the red strap. This isn't a coincidence." Madison's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "Someone at that second-hand store in Portland is part of this operation. They're using legitimate customers like you as cover, selling real bags to regular people, then creating identical ones for their drug mules." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. How many other innocent people could be at risk of being mistaken for smugglers? The reality of how close she'd come to disaster hit Madison hard. "If Michael hadn't been there, if I'd grabbed the wrong bag, I would have lost everything," she whispered. "My son." "That's not going to happen," Michael said firmly. "But I need to ask you something else. The store where you bought the bag, would you be willing to help us identify the people who sold it to you?" Madison's throat went dry. "You mean go back there?" "Eventually, yes. We'd need you to work with our Portland office." He must have seen the panic in her eyes, because he quickly added, "Not right away. Right now, my priority is getting you safely to Boulder. But we'll need your help to stop these people." The thought of returning to Portland made Madison's stomach churn. She'd just escaped that life of constant struggle, of sharing Rachel's tiny apartment, of working double shifts and crying herself to sleep missing Tommy. But then she thought about other mothers, other children who could be separated because of these criminals. "I'll help," she said quietly. "But I need time with my son first." Michael's face softened into a smile that transformed his whole appearance. "Of course. Speaking of which," he closed his notebook and stood up. "We're done here for now. Ready for that ride to Boulder?" Outside, the late afternoon sun was painting the Colorado sky in shades of pink and gold. Michael led Madison to a sleek black SUV in the employee parking area. As he stored her bag in the trunk, she noticed him checking it carefully, making sure it was truly hers. The interior of the car was immaculate and smelled of leather. Madison sat stiffly in the passenger seat, very aware of the contrast between her worn clothes and the luxury surrounding her. As they pulled onto the highway, Michael glanced at her. "You can relax, you know. The hard part's over." Madison laughed shakily. "Is it? Sometimes I feel like everything's the hard part." "Want to talk about it?" His voice was kind, without a trace of judgment. Maybe it was the stress of the day, or the relief of finally heading toward Tommy. But Madison found herself telling him everything about losing her job as a dental receptionist, when the practice downsized, about the mounting bills, about the impossible choice between paying rent and buying Tommy's asthma medication. "So your parents took him temporarily?" Michael asked, as they passed a sign indicating Boulder was 30 miles away. "Yes, they're retired teachers. They have a routine, a stable home, everything I couldn't give him." Madison wiped away a tear. "But now I have savings, and there's a restaurant in Boulder that's already hired me as a server. I'll find a small apartment, enroll Tommy in school." She took a deep breath. "I'll make it work this time." "I believe you will," Michael said softly. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Listen, I know this might seem forward, but I have a friend who owns several apartment buildings in Boulder. Good places, safe neighborhoods. Would you like me to make a call?" Madison turned to look at him, studying his profile in the fading light. "Why are you helping me?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. "Because 6 years ago, my sister was in a situation similar to yours. Single mom, struggling to make ends meet, but she didn't have anyone to help her. He swallowed hard. She lost custody of my nephew. I was overseas with the military then, couldn't do anything. By the time I got back, it was too late." The pain in his voice was raw, real. Madison reached out instinctively, touching his arm. "I'm so sorry. So am I. But maybe I can help make sure another family stays together." He smiled at her, and in that moment, Madison felt something shift between them, a connection deeper than gratitude or circumstance. As the lights of Boulder appeared on the horizon, Madison's heart began to race with anticipation. Soon she would hold Tommy in her arms again, and maybe, just maybe, this unexpected detour in her journey had led her exactly where she needed to be. The familiar streets of Boulder brought a flood of emotions as Michael's SUV wound through the evening traffic. Madison's hands trembled as she typed her parents' address into her phone's map, though she knew the route by heart. Every corner held memories: the park where Tommy had learned to ride his bike, the clinic where she'd taken him for asthma treatments, the diner where she'd worked extra shifts trying to keep them afloat. "Turn left at the next light," she instructed softly, her voice catching. The working-class neighborhood where her parents lived hadn't changed much. Small houses with well-tended gardens lined the streets, their porch lights beginning to flicker on in the dusk. As they approached her parents' house, Madison noticed something odd. The driveway was empty, and no lights were on. Her mother always kept the porch light burning when expecting company. A knot formed in her stomach. "Something's wrong," she muttered, pulling out her phone to call her mother. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried her father's number, same result. Michael parked in front of the house, his security training evident in his alertness. "Stay here," he said. But Madison was already out of the car, rushing toward the front door. Her hands shook as she found the spare key under the flower pot, still there after all these years. The house was dark and silent. Madison flipped on the lights, calling out, "Mom? Dad? Tommy?" Her voice echoed through the empty rooms. The furniture was in place. Nothing seemed disturbed, but there was an eerie stillness that made her skin crawl. Then she saw the note on the kitchen table. "Madison, if you're reading this, we're at Boulder Community Hospital. Tommy had an asthma attack at school today. Don't panic, he's stable, but they want to keep him overnight for observation. Come straight there. Love, Mom." The paper crumpled in Madison's trembling hands. Michael appeared beside her, reading the note over her shoulder. Without a word, he took her elbow, steadying her. "I'll drive you there now," he said firmly. "It's only 10 minutes away." The ride to the hospital was a blur. Madison's mind raced with terrible scenarios. She should have been here. She should never have left him. What kind of mother wasn't there when her child needed her? In the hospital parking lot, Michael caught her arm before she could run inside. "Madison, wait." He pulled out his badge. "Let me help you navigate this. Sometimes hospitals can be difficult about visitation if you're not listed as the primary caregiver." The reality of her situation hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't listed as Tommy's primary caregiver anymore. When she'd left him with her parents, They'd arranged temporary guardianship to handle medical decisions. What if they wouldn't let her see him? At the pediatric ward reception, Madison's fears proved founded. The nurse pulled up Tommy's records with a frown. "I'm sorry, but I can only allow listed guardians to visit right now. Visiting hours are almost over." Before Madison could break down, Michael stepped forward, displaying his badge. "I'm Officer Harrison, with Airport Security. Miss Martinez is here as part of an ongoing investigation, and I need her to have immediate access to her son." The nurse hesitated, looking between them. Michael continued smoothly. "I understand protocol, but this is a special circumstance. I'll take full responsibility." Something in his authoritative tone worked. The nurse nodded reluctantly and buzzed them through. As they hurried down the corridor, Madison whispered, "Thank you, but won't you get in trouble for that?" "Worth it," he replied simply. They found Tommy's room at the end of the hall. Through the window, Madison saw her son lying in the hospital bed, looking small against the white sheets. Her parents sat beside him, her mother reading from his favorite book while her father adjusted the oxygen monitor on Tommy's finger. Madison's feet froze to the floor, tears blurring her vision. Michael's hand found the small of her back, gentle but firm. "Go on," he urged softly. "He needs his mother." She stepped into the room just as Tommy looked up, his face lit up with pure joy. "Mommy!" he cried, his voice raspy but strong. Madison rushed to the bed, gathering him in her arms, careful of the fourth line. He smelled of hospital antiseptic instead of his usual little boy scent, but his arms around her neck were just as she remembered. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "I'm here now." Her parents stood, their expressions a mix of relief and something else worry. Her mother touched her shoulder. "Madison, we need to talk." "Not now," her father interrupted. "Let them have this moment." But Madison could read the tension in their faces. Something was wrong, something beyond Tommy's asthma attack. Her mother's next words confirmed her fears. "The hospital called Child Services," she said quietly. "It's standard procedure when there's a serious medical event and the primary caregivers aren't legal guardians. They're sending someone tomorrow morning to evaluate the situation." The room seemed to spin. Child Services, the very thing she'd been trying to prevent by leaving Tommy with her parents. Now her absence could be used against her. They could say she'd abandoned him. They could. "I can help with that." Everyone turned to look at Michael, who still stood in the doorway. He stepped forward, addressing Madison's parents. "I'm Officer Harrison. Your daughter has been helping us with a crucial investigation. Her time in Portland wasn't abandonment, it was necessary for building a case against a dangerous criminal organization. We can provide documentation to support this." Madison stared at him, understanding dawning. He was offering to backdate her involvement, to make her absence look official rather than desperate. Her father frowned. "What kind of investigation?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss the details," Michael replied smoothly. "But I can have my supervisor contact Child Services directly in the morning." Tommy tugged at Madison's sleeve. "Mom, are you a secret agent?" She laughed through her tears, hugging him close. "No, baby. I'm just your mom, and I'm never leaving you again." Over Tommy's head, her eyes met Michael's. His slight nod told her everything would be okay, but there was something else in his expression, a shadow of doubt, a flicker of guilt. He was putting his career on the line to help her, and she realized with sudden clarity that she couldn't let him do it. She couldn't build her fresh start on a lie, no matter how well-intentioned. She had to face whatever came next with the truth, even if it meant risking everything she'd fought so hard to regain. When morning came to the hospital room, Madison hadn't slept. She sat in the chair beside Tommy's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, steadier now after the night's treatments. Her parents had gone home to rest, promising to return early. Michael had left too, but not before giving her his personal number, and a promise to help however he could. The social worker was scheduled to arrive at 9. Madison watched the clock tick towards the hour, her mind made up. She'd spent the night thinking about Michael's offer to create a cover story, touched by his willingness to risk his career for her. But every time she looked at Tommy's innocent face, she knew she couldn't build their future on lies. At 8:45, there was a soft knock at the door. Michael stood there, looking tired but determined in a fresh suit. "I called my supervisor," he said quietly, stepping inside. "She's willing to back up the story about your involvement in the investigation. All you have to do is say yes." Madison stood, crossing to him. "I can't," she whispered. "Thank you, but I have to tell the truth. Tommy deserves that. You deserve better than risking your career for a lie. Something shifted in Michael's expression: respect, maybe even admiration. Let me stay, he said. Not as a security officer, just as someone who cares. Before she could respond, a woman in a crisp blazer appeared in the doorway. Miss Martinez? I'm Rebecca Chen from Child Protective Services. Shall we talk? The next hour was both the longest and shortest of Madison's life. She sat across from Miss Chen in a small conference room. Michael, a steady presence beside her, and told the truth, all of it. The lost job, the eviction notice, the impossible choice between rent and Tommy's medication, the decision to leave him with her parents while she went to Portland to save money. Every double shift, every saved penny, every tear-filled video call. I know how it looks, Madison said, her voice trembling but determined. I know leaving him seems like abandonment, but I did it because staying would have meant watching him suffer while I couldn't afford his medicine. I did it because he deserved better than sleeping in a car or a shelter. I did it because sometimes being a good mother means making impossible choices. She pulled out the envelope of savings from her bag, along with her new job offer letter from the Boulder restaurant. I have enough for first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit. I have steady work lined up. Tommy's old pediatrician already agreed to see him again, and I've researched after-school programs that can work with my schedule. Miss Chen studied the documents carefully, making notes. And the asthma attack yesterday? Was scary but managed quickly because my parents got him to the hospital right away, Madison answered. I've already talked to the doctor about updating his management plan, and my new insurance will cover his medications. If I may, Michael interjected, I've only known Madison briefly, but I've seen her turn down an easier path because she values honesty and doing right by her son above all else. That speaks volumes about her character. Miss Chen looked between them thoughtfully. Officer Harrison, are you here in an official capacity? No, he replied. I'm here because I believe in Madison's ability to provide a stable, loving home for her son. The social worker made a few more notes, then looked up at Madison. Miss Martinez, I'll be direct. What you did was risky. Leaving your child, even with loving grandparents, raises red flags. However, she closed her notebook. Your honesty today, your clear planning, and the obvious effort you've made to create stability are significant factors. I'm going to recommend a 3-month probationary period. During this time, your parents will maintain shared guardianship while you demonstrate your ability to provide a stable environment. If all goes well, full custody will be restored to you at the end of that period. Madison's breath caught. You mean I can take him home once he's released from the hospital? Yes, but there will be weekly check-ins, and you must notify us of any changes in employment or housing. Tears of relief streamed down Madison's face. Thank you so much. Back in Tommy's room, they found him sitting up in bed, coloring with the crayons a nurse had brought. He looked up as Madison entered. Mom, are you crying? Did the scary lady make you sad? She rushed to hug him, laughing through her tears. No, baby, these are happy tears. We're going home soon, together, to Portland. Tommy's face fell. No, right here in Boulder. And guess what? Grandma and Grandpa are going to visit us all the time while we get settled. Tommy's smile could have lit up the whole hospital as he chattered excitedly about showing her his new toys at her parents' house. Michael touched Madison's shoulder. I should go, he said softly. You need family time. Madison caught his hand. You helped make this possible. Thank you isn't enough. Have dinner with me, he said suddenly. Once Tommy's better and you're settled. Not as a thank you, just because I'd like to know you better, outside of all this drama. I'd like that, Madison replied, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with relief. But you should know, Tommy and I are a package deal. Michael smiled. I hear the pizza place near the park has excellent video games. Perfect for a casual family dinner, wouldn't you say? 2 weeks later, Madison stood in the small but clean apartment she'd found, watching Tommy arrange his action figures on his new shelf. Her parents had just left after helping them unpack, and her first shift at the restaurant started tomorrow. Things weren't perfect, money would be tight, and the probationary period felt like walking on eggshells, but they were together. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Still on for pizza and games tonight? She smiled, typing back, wouldn't miss it. Tommy's been practicing his Pac-Man skills all week. As she sent the message, Madison caught her reflection in the window. The worried lines around her eyes had softened, and though her clothes were still worn, her posture spoke of hope rather than defeat. Sometimes love meant making impossible choices. Sometimes it meant taking the harder path. And sometimes, when you least expected it, it meant finding someone who understood both the struggle and the strength it took to keep going. "Mom," Tommy called from his room. "Can we get extra pepperoni tonight?" Madison laughed. "Anything you want, baby. Anything you want." Life wasn't a fairy tale, but standing there, knowing her son was safe in the next room, and a good man was waiting to share a simple evening with them, Madison realized something important. Sometimes reality was better than any dream she could have imagined, because this was real, this was earned, and this was just the beginning.